My name is Alex Kotlarski. I used to be an iOS developer from iOS 4 or something like that. And then I joined Facebook, where they taught me how to use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to build web apps. So I did that for a while, and then React came out, and I was blown away. I completely fell in love with this framework. I knew it's going to be big. Like, it was such a huge shift that I was really excited about. So I joined React Native team. And I worked on there for like 3 years, focusing mostly on the developer experience, Facebook integrations, and stuff like that. But I also really enjoy building apps with React Native. So last year, we've built F8 app that we open sourced and documented, and it's available out there. And now I'm working at Oculus, helping them build some of the mobile apps. When on the React Native team, the thing that was really exciting to me is that we're giving you access to all platform capabilities. So by just using a simple React component, you get access to the real platform-specific components like UI scroll view or scroll view widget on Android. This is the phrase I've heard many, many times from different people at Facebook. React Native made me 10 times more productive. So I built this scientific graph explaining this. There is time it takes to build the app. We built iOS app, and then Android maybe takes a little longer. And React Native is like hopping 10% of that. However, as a React Native user now, I understand that after 10% of time, the app is not done. It's functional, it's a prototype, it's really fun to play with and see it real, but it's not quite done. And this has to deal with some specifics of mobile platform. It's just that building for mobile platform is different than building for web. I've seen this situation many, many times at Facebook and outside Facebook. People with web experience come into React Native ecosystem. They see all these components that seem very familiar. Like, it's really clear how to use these things. You know, everything is React, so it's simple. They put this component into a mobile app and are happy about this. And it's great because they created something that didn't exist before. However, if you put this up through the brain machine, usually the results turns out like, something is wrong. Like, you can't really tell what, but there is something that just doesn't feel right. Hopefully today I'm going to show you how to arrange some of these components and configure it in the right special way, and using some knowledge and some magic that will result in a good outcome. I'm going to talk to you about these 5 things. All these things are super simple. If you were expecting some like groundbreaking, information, it's like these things are very simple, but they are not obvious if you are coming from web. In the end, I'm going to share the main secret to building amazing apps with React Native. But we're starting with text inputs. Text inputs on web is the thing that just works. You slam a form, you put a few inputs there, and everything is fine. Your computer has a physical keyboard attached to it. Tab key facilitates like fast switch between those things and just works by default. Your browser can autocomplete your email address or password and stuff like that. It's really convenient. So let's say you're building an Instagram login flow and you want to create this form, and there is text input. So your initial implementation might look like this. Just text input with some styles and handling the input events. You put it on a simulator, and it works just fine. You test it, everything's great, you can log in, great. However, running the same app on a mobile device will give you a completely different experience. It's going to be somewhat clunky and won't feel great. And again, this goes back to the fact that just spending 10% of the time doesn't mean the app is completely done. So if you look at the mobile development and all these little details, you will notice that usually you want to autofocus the first text input to spare user an extra tab. You want to use placeholders to highlight what those things are. Keyboard is a software keyboard, so it occupies space on the screen. So you have to care and be careful not to cover important elements like a login with Facebook button here. You have to know how to dismiss keyboard, how to configure each text input to use or not use spell checking, auto-capitalization. You can customize keyboard type to, for example, make it easier to enter email addresses. And you can also program this return key that can do whatever you want. So again, back to the code, React Native actually gives you the full power of all platforms to your disposal. So you can configure it precisely the way it must be, like selecting it keyboard appearance, placeholders, autofocus, capitalization, autocorrect, keyboard type, return key, program the return key, dismiss the key, etc. Wow, this might seem overwhelming, and it is, because React Native provides you the full power. And you can easily abstract this away in your company-specific email input that does everything right and hide this complexity. Coming up next is direct manipulation. What I mean by that is that when you have a mouse attached to your computer, you're directly manipulating this piece of hardware. And this piece of hardware is connected to a thing on the screen, which is a cursor. And cursor is great. It's very precise. It's pixel perfect. It shows you feedback when something is actionable or editable. It also tells you when the computer is busy doing some stuff and won't accept your inputs. Well, it all goes out of the window when you go to mobile devices. The way touchscreen works is that it creates this illusion of direct manipulation. Instead of having a piece of hardware that connects to a pointer, you directly manipulating stuff on your screen. And this has 4 main implications. First, we need instant feedback. Imagine you have a notebook and a pen, and you start drawing something. But there is a delay between you do something and you see a line appear on the paper. It would feel very weird, junky, and after some time, it's just unusable. Well, turns out on mobile devices, mobile browsers add 350 millisecond delay to each tab interaction. And there are good reasons they do that, but I think this contributes a lot to the perception of mobile being slow. On React Native, we use all these touchable things that you can wrap your components, and they usually do the right thing. So definitely use them. Next up, physics. Again, another example, you have a basketball ball, and you drop it on the floor, and it flies like this, and then doesn't bounce back. Again, something is really fishy here. It just feels wrong. So when you are building animations with React Native, make sure that you customize those things to simulate real physical processes, not just some random values that kind of look good, something that feels good. Big shout out here to Wix for building React Native Interactable. This thing is basically a physics engine running on your phone with access to React Native that you can use to program your stuff. This is where the 60 FPS is really important. Like when you drop a frame, this breaks the illusion of direct manipulation, and that creates this feeling of junkiness and not feeling right. Again, React Native provides this use native driver thing that you should use to make sure that all animations are not stopped by JavaScript. Also, there is Interaction Manager module that you can use to coordinate your complex computations and to not interrupt touch and animations. Next up, touch targets. So imagine you have this app and you want to tap the search icon. It's actually so small, I'm not sure you in the back see this. But, and user fingers are pretty big for the screen. It's really hard to, hit directly on that icon. So the way mobile platforms overcome this issue is that they make the top target of the icons and buttons much larger than they appear. So this is an example from Google Material Design, where the top target is 4 times as big as the icon itself. React Native supports all of that. You can set hit slope on your touchable components to make sure that they're easily accessible. React Native also ships with a touchables inspector. So if you turn on inspector and this option, it will highlight all touchables with their hit slope, so you can see directly how big they are. And last but not least, ability to cancel interactions. This is a very complex topic, and it deserves definitely a separate talk. I'm just going to show you one example of how this works by default for the button. So when you push the button but slide away and release, the tap is canceled. So this ability of canceling your direct manipulation is really important. The ability to go back or cancel whatever it's doing. If you're building your custom gestures, this is really, really important. Coming up next, animation and spatial awareness. As human beings, we evolved in a 3-dimensional space. And we have this feeling of things around us. So for example, I don't see the screen behind me, but I still know it's there. We use this concept in the desktop a lot. So for example, I have 2 folders on my desktop, and if they're getting covered by some window like Spotify, I still know they're there, they're under the window, which is a ridiculous thing because the UI is 2-dimensional, but we have this like spatial awareness still built in. However, all desktop applications, they have the luxury of running on a large screen. The same abstraction will just not work for mobile. There is just not enough space, and we're not good at seeing tiny little details. So the way it works on mobile is the apps pretend to have a much larger surface than you can see on the screen. So for example, in the Settings app, it pretends that the settings list is big, much bigger than the screen. And it lets users manipulate this list to see only the part of it. But it's not only about the scroll views. So here's animations that are used on iOS. When you open apps or folders or close them, you'd see where the app's coming from and where they go. On Android, there is a concept of shared element transition, where the same element appears on both screens. And it gives you kind of the feeling of where things are and where they're moving. The point of all of this is that animation is not a luxury. This is not something you sprinkle on top of your app to just make it feel great. Animation is a vital tool for establishing spatial awareness. Another thing that facilitates the spatial awareness is the ability to go back. On iOS, swipe is usually used to go back, or the back button that is in top left. Android is slightly different. They have what they call a hardware back button that is not hardware anymore, but it's still there, and users have very specific expectations of what this button does and what it should do to your app. Here is an example of the Chain React app. And it's a great app. Like, the world is much better with this app than without it. It's just that it has one of these small details. Let's say you are expanding a map view and then pressing back. It takes you back to the first tab, even though the expectations for Android user is to collapse the map back. It's like a subtle detail, and you would expect it, to behave this one way, and then it behaves the other way, and it just feels a little wrong. So those little details, they matter a lot. Next up, loading state. So web is mostly about the pages of content. This is React Native web documentation page, and I'm just gonna start loading it. So I hit enter in the URL bar. I see something coming up on the screen, and then icons load, fonts load, some more content loads. And it feels okay. Like, for the web, it's great. It's just normal. It matches your expectations of web. However, on mobile, it's more nuanced. So let's say you have this app where you have list of tasks and the task details, and you want to transition from one to another. Your initial naive implementation could be something like this. You create a component that takes the task ID, and when this component is mounted, you fetch the task details. And while this is fetching, you are showing the activity indicator, because literally you don't have any data to put on the screen. And it looks like this. You tap something, and it's loading on the full screen. And your app is basically empty for some time. And then it loads, and the experience is meh. It's functional. It's great that you were able to build this in a short time, but the resulting experience is just not awesome. If we look at other examples of this and how it's done right, on Facebook app, for example, when you tap a profile, you get profile information right away. It feels like magic. And it took me some time to figure out what's going on, but it actually makes sense. So the way they do it, if you look at those two screens, a lot of data is actually shared. Like task owner, title, priority, and stuff like that are already known to the list. So what we can do is we can pass these details as an object to the details view and then render it before the data comes back. So we have something to show. And if this content is enough to render at least first half of the screen, the transition will feel instant. Another cool detail we could do is we could start loading the data even before the touch actually happened, on the touch start event. And this is really cool. This can buy you like up to 500 milliseconds of, animating, pushing, animating again. And by that time, if your server is good, you will receive the response and it will feel instant. The way I like to think about these things is you're kind of trading some developer experience for the user experience. You have to go out of your comfort zone and maybe use some frameworks in a way that wasn't intended, but the result is much better user experience. Back to the million-dollar question, which library you should use. I think the point of my talk is that it doesn't matter. As a React Native developer, I spent 3 years building React Native, and I would hate for people to come in and be limited by the framework. Don't compromise your user experience by the frameworks you choose. If something doesn't fit your ideal image of the app, just like go around it, extend it. And for UI library. So at Facebook, we asked some people to build Facebook standard components in React Native for other people to use. And they came back with this, like, building with React Native is so easy, we don't need standard components. And it sounds appealing. Like, if you look at the button, implementation of it could be very simple. It's just touchable opacity with some text. It sounds really cool, simple. Again, it's 10% of the time, doesn't mean it's 100% done. Think about cross-platform, how this button looks on different platforms. What about disabled state, icons, fixed height and heat slope, text wrapping, accessibility, and consistency with other controls? Those things are really hard to get right. So I would really recommend using or building your own standard controls. And for companies like Facebook, Airbnb, and others, we already built our own libraries of components that other people use. The beauty of this approach is that very well designed and built basic components make it so much easier to build amazing apps. All these little details just work fine, and all you need to do is compose them in the right way. So we talked about all these 5 things. What they have in common is to see them, you have to experience it on a real device. You have to run your app not on your simulator, but on your real iPhone or Android. Animations and gestures are essential tools. They're not luxury. And sometimes you have to go beyond what frameworks provide, right? Maybe some native code, or use something that is not considered good practice in Redux. All of these things I talked about, they're not rocket science. In fact, you don't even need a human-computer interaction degree to understand those things. They're simple. However, I was looking for resources on that, and I couldn't find some. I think the reason is partially because this knowledge is built into the experience of native developers. For them, it's natural. Like, they know these things even without realizing they're knowing them. But if you're coming from web, it might be a little bit challenging to get all these things right. So Brent and I added in this new section to React Native documentation that will have all these small snippets and little details. Feel free to contribute to that as well. But most importantly, you have to learn to see these things. You can read about all this for a long time, but just start noticing it. It will come apparent, and you will, once you learn to see it, it's going to be much, much easier. So back to the main secret of building amazing apps with React Native is you have to care. You have to care about user experience. Deeply, truly care. And this slide doesn't have designers have to care, because if you look at the designer tools, they're actually great for drawing dead fish. Definitely look at Brett Victor's talk. He argues that all these two-dimensional flat things, they are frozen in time. They're non-interactable. It's really hard to design proper user experience with just these tools. All these little details I talked about, they're actually big. They contribute to the quality, and this quality is our responsibility. The developers are responsible for the quality of the apps, not designers, not the users, not the PMs. It's important because quality defines the perception of our businesses. Imagine Twitter app being a very shitty app. Nobody would use it, and Twitter will go down. It's very important for your business value to have amazing app presence. But what's even more interesting and important for this conference is that the quality of the apps we built with React Native defines the perception of React Native ecosystem as a whole. So as React Native developers and contributors, I'd like us to focus on building the pit of success. We need to build these little details into the basic components so that the default way is the right way, so it's easier to build amazing experiences. We also need to talk more about UX. So if you're preparing a conference, submitting a talk, or doing React Native training, include some stuff about user experience into your materials. And we need more great examples of the apps built with attention to detail. So on the second floor, there is a coffee station. I'm going to hang out there if you have any questions. With that, thank you very much.